Hello and welcome to this first lesson in learning Pro Tools for Library at the Dock. Before we start the lesson, there's a few things that you're going to need. You will have needed to have downloaded this zip file, which is supplied next to this video. And this contains some audio files that we're going to work with in the lesson. You also need to have downloaded Pro Tools and have that installed on your computer. For this lesson, I'm going to be using Pro Tools First, which is a free version of Pro Tools that you can download. If you just Google Pro Tools First, you'll be able to download a free version of Pro Tools and have that installed on your computer. If you've got a better version of Pro Tools than that, it'll look the same and it'll function the same, so you'll be able to still follow along with the lesson. Pro Tools First is a little bit tricky to install. You need to create an account, you need to be connected to the internet. There's a few things that you need to do, and you should know that Avid doesn't provide customer support for Pro Tools First, as it's a free piece of software. So if you get stuck, unfortunately, you're going to be having to resort to going to forums and trying to figure out what problems are. But if you can get it to install and you've got that installed on your computer and you can get Pro Tools opening and you have a zip file, then you should be ready to go. One more thing that I would highly recommend for these lessons is to plug a mouse into your computer and not use a trackpad. Pro Tools is far easier to use with a mouse with a scroll wheel. And I'll be teaching you how to use the scroll wheel to navigate around Pro Tools and to zoom in and zoom out. Scrolling is by far the best way to use Pro Tools, and I recommend plugging in a mouse for these lessons. So once you've got a mouse and the zip file and you have Pro Tools installed, then we're ready to go. So open up Pro Tools and you'll be greeted by this dashboard screen. And this will give you a few options. You can either create a Pro Tools session from a template, or you can create a blank Pro Tools session. Now I'm just going to create a blank Pro Tools session. Let's call it Workshop 1 and click Create. Now you should be into Pro Tools. You can resize any of the windows by hovering your mouse over the edge of the window, and so it turns into these little arrows. So I'm going to actually hover over to the corner of this and drag this a little bit bigger. This window over here is actually the mix window. I'm just going to close this for now. Let's close the mix window and let's just resize this edit window so that it's full screen. You've got your transport here. I'm going to just drag the transport around. You can drag any of the windows about. Now this first lesson is primarily dedicated to giving you a tour and an overview of the different features of Pro Tools. Next lessons we'll get into some audio editing and some more fun stuff. But for now, I want to talk you through a few things that are critical in running Pro Tools well. First of all, if you go up to your options up here and go to Setup, Playback Engine at the top. Now, this is where your sound is from Pro Tools is going to go. So if you have a sound card plugged in, and if you really want to use Pro Tools well, you should have a dedicated USB sound card, which will be able to take your audio and output that and enable you to plug in some good speakers or a good pair of headphones. And it'll also probably give you inputs so that you can record into Pro Tools as well. So this playback engine will tell you where your sound is going. Now, at the moment, we've got Pro Tools aggregate input and output, and that is basically just going to use your computer's system audio. And that's fine for now. But if you have another USB sound card, you'll be able to select that here. Optimizing your engine for recording or playback is depending on what you're using Pro Tools for. If you're using Pro Tools primarily for recording, recording voiceover, recording for a band, then you want to switch that to record because it'll perform much better. But if you're editing a podcast, then you can switch that to playback and it'll perform better as a editing machine. So click OK. Now, in order to show you some different aspects of this edit window, I'm going to get you to import some audio and to make a few new tracks. So let's import some audio first. We'll go File, Import. And then if you navigate to your Pro Tools Workshop zip file folder that you downloaded and unzipped, and let's just get the first file in that folder, avbeat001.wave, and click Open. And that's going to create a track for that WAV file. Let's also create another track in this edit window. If we go up to Track New, this is going to give us the option to create a blank track without an audio file in it. So you can see here there's a few options. We've got Create 1, that's the number of tracks. So let's create 2. We'll create 2 mono audio tracks, and we'll call them drums. Now, if you click this plus here, we can also add, we'll create 1 stereo master fader. Now, I always add a master fader because all your audio will pass through this fader, and so you can put effects and you can change the volume of all your audio with this master fader. So let's click Create. And you can see that it's numbered the drums, drums 1, drums 2. Now, if you want to move these tracks around, let's click on this master name here, and we can click and drag that up to the top. Let's put the master fader up at the top. And if you wanted to change the name of any of them, you can double click on the name and change that name. Let's change the name of avbeat001 to sample, because that's the sample that we're using. Now, this sample here is very hard to see. It's very small. And I want to zoom in on this sample so we can see it a little bit better. Now, if you've plugged in a mouse and you have a scroll wheel, you can very easily zoom in on this sample by holding down Option and scrolling. And you'll see what happens is that this sample gets bigger. And what that's actually doing is zooming in on the timeline here. Now, the timeline at the moment is in bars and beats. So you can see here it says 1 bar, 1 beat, 1 bar, 1 beat. But I always like to view the timeline in minutes and seconds so we can see how long things are and where you're up to in your edit. So if we go up to this number up here and click on this little down arrow, you can see that it's set to bars and beats. Let's change that to minutes and seconds. And now you can see that this is 2.5 seconds long. And you can see as you zoom out, by holding down Option and scrolling, you can see that, up here is 46 seconds. And so if you need to get somewhere in your edit, it's a lot easier to view this timeline up here in this gray bar up the top than having it on bars and beats. Now, there's another way to zoom in onto this audio file, and that is to change the track height. This little gray bar here to the left, it looks like a little ruler. If you right click on that, you should be able to select different sizes. So if I'm just focusing it on this one particular track, maybe I might turn that onto jumbo, or you can even have that fill the whole window if you want. And then if you zoom in, you can see you get a really great view of that waveform. For now, let's just set that to large. And you can see that that is larger than all of the other tracks. You can also resize the track height by hovering your mouse in between tracks and just clicking and dragging. So you can see here, you can resize the tracks like that. Now, as we've made a few new tracks, the tracks are added to this tracks list up here. And if I click on any of these, it's going to select that particular track in this edit window. This is useful if you have a lot of tracks and they're all very large and you can't see them all and you have to scroll down. This will always stay as a very condensed list, and you can easily click about and jump to a particular track. There's a few other things that you can do in this window here. You can hide tracks by clicking one of these little circles on the left. That will just hide that track. So, for example, if you wanted to just focus on this sample and just you're working with that and you're doing some editing, you might want to hide everything else. So you can click and hide everything else there. Just be aware though that when you've hidden other tracks, it doesn't mean that the audio on those other tracks won't play. So if you had a little bit of audio in this other track and it was hidden, it's still going to play. one way to ensure that that audio doesn't play is to make a track inactive. Now, if you've finished with a track and you've chopped up some audio and moved it onto other tracks, and you are done with it, instead of deleting that track, a better process is to right-click and click Make Inactive, or even better, Hide and Make Inactive. And what that's going to do is it's going to completely turn off that track. Now you can see that track has become grayed out, and that means that this track won't be playing any audio and it's essentially turned off, but you haven't deleted it. So if you did need to restore that track and bring it back, if there was something else there that you thought you might like, you can just right click and select Make Active, and then it will bring that track back. Another way to ensure that your audio doesn't play is to use the mute or the solo buttons here on each track. Now, you've got a few little buttons here. One is an M for mute, and one is an S for solo. So what solo will do is it will mean that only this track will play. Only the tracks that are soloed will play. What mute does is, as the name suggests, it will stop the audio playing on that track. The other two buttons here are for recording into that, which we will get to in subsequent lessons. Now, while we're focused here on this solo and mute, I'm going to talk you through a few other features around this area. To the right of solo and mute, you'll find your VU meters, and you'll see there's one per track. And this is this sort of green, yellow, and red bar. And this is going to tell you your audio level, give you a visual representation for your audio level for that track. So you can see that if I press play by pressing spacebar or hitting the play button, you can see that audio meter went up. And you know, this will tell you if your audio is too loud, it will go up into the red, and there'll be a little clip indicator right at the top. And you'll also notice that the master fader had volume as well. And that is because, as I mentioned before, the master fader is the sum of all of your audio. All your different channels will all feed through that master fader. So you can see if you are overloading your master and you have too much volume coming in. Now, to the right of the VU meter, you can see up the heading up here says Inserts A to E. Now, inserts are effects or plugins that you can add onto each of your channels or add onto your master fader. So, for example, if you wanted to put an EQ onto this drum beat or put some reverb, that's where you would do it. And you add an effect by clicking on one of these gray bars and navigating down to plugin, and you'll see here you've got some effects that you can add. To the right of this, you see I/O, and this is your inputs and outputs. And this is where you're going to select your input for recording onto that channel. So if you're recording some guitar or your voice, and you have a USB sound card, you would click on this, select interface, and select the right input for what you're recording onto that particular track. And your output, if you've got some speakers, you want to make sure that your output is set to those speakers so you can actually hear the output of this channel. Underneath output, you have your volume and pan. And if you click on the number of the volume there, it brings up a little fader, and you can increase or decrease the volume for that particular track. This is very handy for just making quick adjustments on the fly. If you were going to do a mix of a whole session, I'd probably do that in the mix window. But as you're creating things in the edit and you don't want to switch windows, you can just grab this number and drag it up or down, especially if you notice that something's way too loud and you just need to make a coarse adjustment. Grab that, drag it down. And pan is your left and right pan in your stereo field, but for a drum track like this, I'd probably just leave that as 0 in the middle. Now, if you want to reset any of these numbers quickly without having to drag, you can just hold down Option and click on the number, and it will reset to 0. This drum break is quite loud, so I'm going to bring that volume down to about 20. And you'll see what happens when I click play by pressing spacebar. If I turn that right down, this VU meter stayed right up here at the top, but the master fader was right down at the bottom. And that's because of the signal path of this audio. So when you have some audio on a channel, it's going to come through this channel left to right, and then it's going to go up to the master fader left to right. So I'll explain to you where the audio goes. Here is your audio here in this channel. It's going to come through left to right. So it's going to come through this VU meter first, then it's going to go to your inserts and effects, and it will go through top to bottom. This first one, then the second one, then the third, fourth, fifth. Then it will go to this little volume fader. So because we are turning this volume fader down, it doesn't affect this VU meter because this goes through this VU meter before it gets to this volume fader. Then after this volume fader, it goes through your output, which automatically goes to your master fader here. And then in your master fader, it will go through this VU meter, through all these effects, and then finally to your master volume up at the top here. So that concludes this first lesson about Pro Tools for Library at the Dock. Make sure before you finish, you go up and click File and Save to save your session. We'll be using this session in the next lesson, and I hope you can join me then. We'll get stuck into some proper editing.